Trying this again. Restream's access to your LinkedIn account will expire soon. How helpful. Reconnect. Everybody enjoying... everybody. Like, is anybody here? Yeah, of course it's not logged in. Great. Okay. Is that working? It says it's live. It says it's streaming. I don't know if it's working. Your LinkedIn. Yeah, but my LinkedIn... So, it's kind of... This kind of brings me on to my first topic, really. So, yeah, there's a topic that I've been wanting to do for ages. Yeah, I mean, it says it's excellent, but also no, it's saying it's disconnected. Reconnecting. Reconnection successful. This could be anything. Anyway, hello. Did we enjoy that? This is why I need a producer. I need like a professional producer who can help me do this stuff. So some people may know that I do this in my shed. In the garden. So, I mean, I've obviously made it look not like a shed, as you can see. But the funny thing is that it's really hot in here now. And there was this golden period, this kind of Goldilocks period, for about 30 minutes, where it went from being winter and being much too cold and too like horrible and humid to being actually way too hot. So the question is whether I want to sit here for 40 minutes or if I want to open the door. Don't know, it's a mystery, isn't it? God, that's a lot of drop frames. Is this actually working? It says it's excellent. I don't know. I don't know what she's doing. Thing is, I don't want to keep logging in and logging out. Yeah, I can't remote into my... Yeah. Bandwidth in the shed isn't very good. So in the house I've got gigabit internet, but in the shed not so much. Right, what are we going to talk about today? I've got a list of stuff. So a piece that I've been wanting to talk about for ages is the headline that I've got in my little notes thing where I note down the stuff that I want to talk about is the notion that everything cost reduced is bad. But nowadays, everything is cost reduced, right? So so I'm going to nick some. I saw a Rory Sutherland post on TikTok this morning, which was kind of talking about the dynamics of this obliquely. He was sort of explaining there are sort of three elements to product design, and he explained it in context of a cassette deck. Kind of really aware that I'm the last generation that actually knows what a cassette deck is, and that even someone like in their 30s possibly doesn't even know what a cassette deck is. But anyway, the general principle, and I think they said it was a Kato, K-A-T-O design principle, is that there are three different things that you can put into a product. So there's the first one is kind of like the table stakes, the stuff that you have to do in order to be considered as a product in the field. So the example that Roy used on his post was about milk. Let's say you are trying to get milk into a supermarket. Your table stakes have to be that your bottle does not leak, right? So if you get somebody to try not using the supermarket brand and go for your kind of like brand of milk doing whatever it is that it does, if someone puts a lid on it, puts it in the fridge and it leaks, they're not going to be a customer. So basically it's kind of like this, there's some stuff that you and everybody has to do in order to kind of play the game. Then there's the stuff that you kind of do that is unique to you, whatever it is. Again, I don't know much about milk, so the fact that he used this analogy was really weird. But the example that he used as like the cassette deck actually made more sense. But again, it won't necessarily make sense to anyone who actually is listening to this. So this comes down to the fact that in order to kind of differentiate yourself in the market, you may have a certain philosophy or a thesis about how your product should work. So if you're doing a cassette player, that might be that it's a really consistent speed and that the speed is accurate and there's no wow and flutter and that you've got two types of noise reduction and you support all, 3 or 4 different types of tape. etc. That might be what you do to differentiate yourself, and you base your prices on that. And then you have this thing extra. You have this third thing, which is the idea of what you do to kind of be delightful, what you do that creates a sort of a, oh, well, that's amazing kind of thing. And I think one of the reasons, what prompted me to think about this is I went to Berlin on Ryanair. Now, I don't mind flying on Ryanair. Berlin was very nice as well. But kind of like, it's obviously a very cost-reduced offer. But even Southwest Airlines, which inspired kind of things like EasyJet and then Ryanair and all of these other low-cost airlines, it was kind of, how do you basically make a cost-reduced offer that is still sufficiently good enough? The problem now is that everything is cost-reduced. Another thing that prompted me into this, I was watching a Marcus Brownlee video about the Cybertruck. It's a Tesla Cybertruck. And he was saying, and I didn't really know this, I've never driven a Tesla. Well, I have driven a Tesla. It didn't go very well. And I've never owned a Tesla. I've never really been in a Tesla. But it apparently has a reputation for being really cost reduced, which sort of makes sense because it's a technology product. And it's the technology products that kind of bring this philosophy of cost reduction into kind of everyday life, right? And he was basically saying that the mirror in the Tesla Cybertruck is just a piece of mirrored glass, right? It is a normal analog mirror. And if you want to have the rear view camera, that is on the main display, because obviously there's a cost reduction in having a mirror that you've adhered to the windscreen and a piece of software where you've just got one single display and you're kind of projecting the camera view onto that, or presenting the camera view through that. And it's what got me thinking about this thing with Rory Sutherland this morning is kind of like, where do we ever see those third things now, right? Where is what if everyone is chasing after the cost reduction, everything is getting bad? It's because we've really stopped ever producing products that delight people. I can't think, generally speaking, was this different before? So I think, again, part of the reason why I do these lives is to try and think things through a little bit better, rather than just putting it out on a post. But it's kind of, where have we really gone down a road now where everything is so cost reduced and nothing is delightful? And are we basically defaulting to giving everyone the bare minimum, right? And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think it's really difficult. Not necessarily, it's possible to buy premium products, or kind of Veblen, when that goes up into Veblen goods and stuff. But is it where does the cost reduction end? For example, if you go to Wetherspoons and you go and have a steak and chips and a drink, that might cost you £15 or 13, £15. Or if it's a soft drink, I don't know. I don't drink, so I don't know how much the alcoholic drinks are. But it's that sort of price, right? But it's not very good. It's kind of at a bare minimum, they will never cook the steak the way that you put your steak in the app, right? They if you say you want it rare or medium rare, they will do it well done every time. Now that sounds like the most ridiculous complaint, but it's still like a nearly 50. It's still nearly £15 you're shelling out for this, right? And if you go to kind of Nando, I went to Nando's yesterday because I had one of those orange rewards I needed to use up. And if I hadn't have used the orange reward, my burger and chips and the refillable soda I had with it would have come to about £15, £16, £17, right? So roughly the same. However, I live quite close to one of the finest hotels in the country, right? And if I go down there and maybe to do a bit of work, and I think, I'm going to have one of their sandwiches, and I might have they do this pastrami sandwich down there, which is just unbelievably good, right? So I go there and I buy, the service is incredible. Everyone kind of knows, everyone knows you, gets to know your name. You feel really looked after. The quality of the food is astounding. The ingredients are great. The service is great. So that pastrami sandwich, and again a Diet Coke, these are all kind of roughly baseline lunchy kind of things. I can do that for less than 20 quid. And it's where there's no cost reduction there at all. But yet the real cost in differential the differential real cost isn't too much. So either it can't be rampant profiteering at the lower end, right? But it also, why is the higher end not charging more money? To me, it's kind of, look, this is, I do get quite incensed by this sort of the fact that it's really difficult to find things where there is sort of an effortful or a delightfulness that comes with it, right? So, actually, we'll talk about hosting later. So some people might have seen that review that I did of OVH Cloud, which was appalling. I mean, it was a fundamentally it was an unusable product because they had cost reduced it to the point where they just did not give a toss about you as the customer. But we have this other hosting company that we work with for clients, which is it's a small business. It's a small business hosting company, really competent. But you know what? You can go down there and you can meet the staff and you can do everything. It is delightful because it's not cost reduced. It's somebody going, well, we have a passion about delivering this thing in this really specific way, and that's what we want to do. But it is kind of interesting. The only thing that I can kind of think of in my life where there isn't where I can kind of not see that cost reduction is in hospitality. But anyway, however, another thing about cost reduction is AliExpress. So I've been doing a bit of electronic stuff. Now, I'm not particularly good at electronics. Might be doing myself a disservice there, but I don't do much of it because I never really need to make things. But I do like to make things, and it kind of, a project we were doing for a client weirdly necessitated us to buy a 3D printer. Right? Don't ask me to go into how those two things link up. Whatever. We needed a 3D printer, and I've never used a 3D printer, but I'm not very good at making things physically, which is sort of, I'm a fourth generation engineer. So I'm an engineer, a software engineer. My mum and dad were engineers. My mum's dad was an engineer. So that's, So that's 3, isn't it? Because that's my grandparents. And then apparently the generation above my great grandparents were engineers as well. But I can't make things. I just can't do it. It's like I can do things with software. I can't do things physically. I get impatient. I don't have that fine level of control. There's no undo. I think a lot of it is I don't have the patience. I just really rush it. But 3D printing, I've discovered, oh wow, I can make things. So all the stuff that kind of I don't do in the real world, I can sort of do. Anyway, so that's kind of led me into doing more kind of electronic stuff. And for example, I bought this from, you have to exclude the 3D thing here. So this is a 4G router. This cost me, and it's got a gift gaff in it, right? This cost me £20 shipped, and it arrived within 5 days. The equivalent on Amazon, like if you've got a D-Link or a TP-Link 4G router for that, is not £20. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Matt, do we really want to be using communication devices from China? And the answer is no, we don't. But specifically for this job, this isn't really important. But where this has kind of got to is that I've been buying loads of stuff from AliExpress to kind of do this to this hobby. The reason why this bracket is on here is because although it is 20 quid, the SIM slot is broken and it won't latch in. So this little thing here goes on the other side. And ignore the fact that I haven't, this is obviously where the support material is, it's crap. What this does is it holds the SIM in place. Because I would rather have done that than try to have opened a customer support ticket with the seller and then got another one shipped out. Probably would have been fine. But e.g., I bought an oscilloscope. I bought and it was 50 quid. And it's not going to be, don't get me wrong, it's not going to be a good oscilloscope. It's not going to be any good for doing kind of modern electronics. But for some of the stuff that I was doing, because I quite like doing the light stuff, right? I've obviously got the lights all in here. That was all done. Like one of the things that's a real pain is it's got like this hair light here and this sort of accent light over here. They don't come on when you do the the home the Alexa home automation to turn everything else on. And these are Raspberry Pi driven, right? So I've got this one connected to a Raspberry Pi, and I've got, what's the other one? Oh, that's the other one. The Matrix thing is Raspberry Pi. What am I going on about that for? So, right. This is all cost reduced, but it's good. Yeah, and I've actually got on here, I mean, you can't see it, but I've got a teleprompter. Like, I'm not using it for this, but if I did a scripted thing, then I've got like a little display down here that just reflects up onto a teleprompter I bought from Amazon. That teleprompter was the actual glass was quite expensive, overly expensive, I think, but the screen was like, that was 20 quid, and that's got an HDMI input, and that just connects through to the PC that I use for doing the stuff in the studio. But what I want to do is get a printer. I fitted this before I bought the 3D printer, so I might just do a 3D printed bracket for that and make it slightly better. Yeah, so there's obviously this benefit of the cost reduction, and these products are not really designed to be delightful, but I suppose I could say that. It's kind of like they're obviously designed to be composed into delightful things, right? So just in kind of this space, I've worked reasonably hard to make this look nice. Yeah, you wouldn't know it was a shed in the back of the garden, but it's like I've bought these cost reduced parts, but I've not tried to put them together in a cost reduced way. I've tried to put them together in a way that seems delightful. So I didn't really close off that analogy about the milk. I can't even remember what Rory said about the milk now, in terms of, obviously the bottle shouldn't leak. It kind of like should do something other milk shouldn't do. Like, that's your differentiator, like it's organic, or it kind of is half oat, half real milk. Why would you do that? I don't know. Anyway, AliExpress, unbelievable. Oh, this oscilloscope, right? Yes, I bought this oscilloscope, but it's got a multimeter, so my multimeter's not particularly good. So I really only use the multimeter that I've got. I had a nice one, which I lost it. So I had a cheap one, but I use that for kind of connectivity stuff. But in terms of, I didn't have anything to test transistors or measure resistance of resistors I've got lying around, and this 3-in-1 oscilloscope does that, and that was 40 quid. Yeah, shipped. Then it, arrived within 3 days. I bought another couple of those displays for some other kind of project stuff that I'm doing. Yeah, it's really, really, really good. So moving swiftly on to the other topics that I've wanted to talk about today. So I did put a post up yesterday about why. One of the things I've been really trying to work out is, why has ChatGPT not actually done anything? Why hasn't it changed the world, right? It's kind of, that's obviously a intentionally controversial statement, because everyone's going to sit there and go, it has. It's like a really big thing, but it hasn't changed the world in the way that other things did, right? Like having Windows 95 democratizing access to that level of computing technology and putting the internet in everyone's homes changed everyone in a way that ChatGPT has not. Everyone, when ChatGPT was out and everyone was kind of wringing their hands going, oh my god, it's going to be the loss of jobs, blah 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 blah, we are 18 months in, and I, as kind of a professional software engineering commentator on kind of technology, the use cases still are not there. There still are no good use cases for generative AI that are better than so what, but they're not as good as, oh my god, where have you been all my life? It's, yeah, funnily enough, it probably fits into that same sort of thing, right? It kind of like, what's your table stakes? What does it have to do nothing else can do? And what does it do that's delightful? It's good enough to pass table stakes. It passes kind of a so what test. It does do things that we previously wouldn't have been able to do before, but it really doesn't do anything that's significantly transformative, right? The last major paradigm shift that we saw was the introduction of the iPhone, and that got us into a position where the iPhone, along with the greater availability of always-on internet connectivity, was the thing that did it, because it basically put people in much closer proximity, both in terms of time and space, to internet connected services, to cloud services. It made it possible to do things at the time Foursquare. That was realistically a product that, I mean, it's kind of Nowheresville now, but at the time that was a really strange thing to be able to do, that you could go somewhere and you could check in and you could say, I'm here, and other people who are there could kind of go, I'm here as well. That was, if you think about trying to do that with a laptop, no, I mean, and also, how would you even do it with a laptop? I've been doing this stuff for so long that I'm thinking I've done, before we had 4G, because 3G possibly worked well enough, but before we had 3G, I'm just trying to think how we would have done it. We had Wi-Fi in cafes and shops when we were out and about, which was effectively just broadband. I remember sitting in, like, going to a conference in London a long time ago and parking up in one of the cafes and having a laptop and using my Nokia 6210 or whatever, or 6310i, with the IRDA port, and using an IRDA modem in the laptop to go out and connect to the internet to download emails. So yeah, anyway, ChatGPT just hasn't been as transformative as it was supposed to be, and I think this is the point of the video that I did on Wednesday. Yeah, because the one that I had queued to post on Thursday actually didn't post properly. What the paradigm shift seem to do is they seem to increase the audience. They seem to basically create a different modality of operation, which ChatGPT largely doesn't do. So, but the flip side to this is I use ChatGPT every day, so I'm not exactly sitting there going, it has no use whatsoever. It manifestly does have a use, and it's consistently saved me, I don't know, half a day a week since its introduction. Right, that's a big chunk of time. It's not as big as what happened, when I first had the internet in the house, or I first had a smartphone, or I first had an iPad, e.g. It's okay, but it's not anything flash. Anyway, one of the reasons I'm thinking, why does this work for me? And sometimes I will use ChatGPT to do kind of tasks that someone has asked me to do that I can't really be bothered with. Not in a... Because sometimes people ask you to do things and it's kind of like they needed to do it for their process, but actually the value of what you're doing isn't particularly good. Anyway, that's not the core reason why I use it. How I ended up conceptualizing how I use ChatGPT is that I use it a bit like, I think, a lawyer uses a paralegal or uses a paralegal team. So when I'm using ChatGPT for stuff that I really understand, which in my world, that's software engineering, because I understand that really well and I don't understand anything else about the universe. If I'm doing stuff about if I'm doing ChatGPT stuff about software engineering, then I get really good results, because I can see where the edges of what it's telling me are. Right, and I think that's a big problem with ChatGPT, in that if you ask it about something that you don't know like the back of your hand, it is convincing. Like, one thing is, we're used to kind of truth coming out of computers, right? Computers don't tend to make shit up, although obviously ChatGPT does kind of manifestly make things up, but we're used to a baseline level of truth with computers. And the other thing is kind of like the way that it presents itself is very confident. So what I didn't say in the post that I did that went out yesterday was that when I'm kind of thinking about ChatGPT as being a paralegal, what I'm saying is that if I'm in a domain and I vertically want to kind of reach down to somebody who is earlier career than me, right? I've got X years experience, this person might be new, and they've obviously got some attributes I don't have, and I've got some attributes that they don't have, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that I don't really have as an attribute of is really diligent reading. So I can say to my ChatGPT paralegal, for example, one of the things I was doing with this stuff was connecting a GPS to a Raspberry Pi, right? So it's kind of like, it's easier for me to go to ChatGPT and say, give me a Python script that connects to this USB GPS device, and it goes, here it is, and you look at it and you kind of go, yeah, that seems right. What I know about building software for that platform and what I know about building IoT software is what it's recommending to me there seems about right. What I'm asking it to do is that kind of research piece that a paralegal might do. Where I think ChatGPT doesn't work effectively at all, really, is when you ask it to do stuff that's outside a domain that you don't understand. When you fully defer or delegate it to do something and you're assuming that the results it comes back with are really good. Like, from my perspective, this is always marketing content or sales content. It comes back with an average response. Or if you ask it something like I asked it the other day, something that not much research is done on, right? So IT budgets. People will sit there until the cows come home and research IT budgets for enterprises. They will say, you've got 10,000 users. We will desperately benchmark what you're doing your IT spend on, and we will break it down and we will get accurate results. If you go mid-market or small market, so a larger SME, let's say you pick a business which is, pick a round number, so 6 million a year. And you ask ChatGPT, what is the budget of that sort of business? It can't tell you because there's no data there, but it'll still look relatively convincing. And it's kind of like, is this any more useful than me guessing? Is it any more useful than me just saying 3%? Like, it will go always between 1 and 8%. Oh, is it? Is it really? What's the average? Without the research, it doesn't necessarily know. So anyway, so generative AI to me works really well for kind of paralegal class work. It does, and I should say, I don't mean paralegal in that only does legal stuff. I just mean kind of like if you're an accomplished professional at the top of your career and you need some help doing stuff because you need some stuff reading, and at a minimum that's going to burn your time. What you want somebody to go and do all that stuff for you, summarize it, and then you can kind of go, well, that summary, that kind of aligns with where I thought it would go because I've got enough experience to judge it. So well done, paralegal, you've done a nice job. So I think that makes a ton of sense. Where are we? Cool. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was hosting. Oh, man. So hosting is a really interesting kind of problem in the UK. So the way that one of the biggest errors, it's not one of the biggest errors, probably is the biggest errors that can happen with a business where the technology leadership is more emerging, is that if you say to a developer, what do I host this on? A developer will say, you need to put it on Azure or AWS, because developers don't have any idea about money. They don't really know how much things cost. And let me let you into a secret. Sometimes they will make decisions that make a lot of sense for their career and their CV, but don't necessarily make a lot of sense for the commercial footing of the organization. Part of this is that generally, as an industry, I think this is probably a kind of a global thing, we don't tend to educate technicians, whatever their particular focus is, on the commercial reality of the business that they operate in. So we isolate them from money. So for one thing, we kind of pay them quite well. For another thing, we'll kind of give them stuff that they ask for, but also but you can end up with them making decisions which are kind of very commercially based, but are not from a perspective of actually putting together a really decent business case. And most developers will end up just going, you should run it on Azure or AWS because it's a safe choice for them and it's a safe choice for the business. However, it's a fantastically expensive choice. So I guess it's not a safe choice for the business because it exposes you to really unnecessary costs. However, in the UK, you have this you have this extremely considerable problem in that most of the hosting companies in the UK are crap. Where this pre-Brexit, this was a lot easier because you could put your hosting services in Europe and you didn't have any data portability problems. Nowadays, you do, obviously, because post-Brexit, you can't export that data overseas without doing a lot of compliance work. And that compliance work is expensive and risky, and it's easy. In every case, it's easy, unless it's really the thing that you love. it's always easier just to defer and say, I'm just gonna stick. But the problem you have with that is most of the tier 2 providers, and by tier 2 I mean something that's not AWS cloud, they're really bad. If you go for a dedicated or VPS host, you are not having a good relationship with those vendors. You're not having a kind of a white glove. It's cost reduction. Ironically, this is the point. It gets cost reduced to the point where there is no delightful customer service coming out the other end, unless you specifically go and buy that. Unless you specifically go, I want to put this on Rackspace because of their white glove service, or I want to go with XYZ provider, but buy their commercial enterprise grade solution, right? So, by which case you kind of you end up doing yourself a bit of a disservice, because you then paying for stuff that you won't necessarily need. If you are a smaller business, and again, okay, let's look at kind of between 6 and 12 million pound revenue for that, you don't need enterprise grade hosting. But in the UK, you either get shit hosting or you get enterprise grade hosting. There's no middle ground. So the solution to this is to use co-location. Because co-location has a lower real cost, and you can find some good providers where they will, because you are supposed to be looking after the kit, they're not charging you these big kind of premium service pricing. However, there's another problem in that it's very difficult to kind of know, well, what do we buy? Like, we've got some co-locate space. Let's say we got like a quarter rack. So we've got like a quarter rack, which is sort of like be the minimum for a relatively complex hosting solution. Then you kind of go, well, I need to buy a Dell or an HP server, and then you look at that and you kind of go, oh, these are about £5,000 a pop. You think plus, it's like, oh, I don't think I want to pay that. So then the capex cost gets really high. So you end up with this really nasty situation where your capex has kind of got into 5 digits for doing this really simple solution, standing up against kind of dedicated, which is either so cheap it's cheap and shit, or it's so expensive you kind of, do you actually just want to put it on Azure AWS? That's a different question about whether actually is there really any value in kind of just having virtual machines on Azure AWS, or do you actually want to use more of the platform type features? But if you're doing that, you need a great sophistication, great spend in terms of your DevOps capability. Right. Anyway, where am I going with this? So if you say, actually, I don't want Dell, I don't want HP, I don't want enterprise class because I'm not an enterprise, I'm an SME. And you think, all right, well, I could get a server from Supermicro. And from there, you can kind of see more sensible pricing. But there's another tier, which I'm a real fan of, which is prosumer, which is where you go and you buy. I feel so controversial saying this, and it's just kind of like, look, I put my money where my mouth is on this one. I think it works. I think it works based on the fact that hardware actually doesn't fail. So it's a difficult risk management problem, because hardware does not fail until it does fail. In which case, kind of like, how much of a furore has that caused? Anyway, so one of the things that we've been doing more of is these. We'll go and buy a case. We'll go and buy one new case. We'll go and buy a Ryzen, an AMD Ryzen motherboard, which has got an IPMI port, so it's got lights out. So it has integrated lights out, or IPMI, or whatever you want to call it, which means that you can address it while it's off in the rack. Right, it has that management capability. You then go and put a Ryzen 9 processor in it, and you tune that Ryzen 9 processor so that it's got a really good TDP. So the one that we use, I can't remember the model number we use. I don't think it's 7900. It's a Ryzen 9 anyway. But the TDP is only about 85. That can be paired against DDR5 RAM. You can run that DDR5 RAM, obviously at 6,000 mega transfers per second. You can put some. You don't need to have a kind of enterprise PCI, you could have PCI Gen 5 in there, you can have PCI Gen 4, I think I've got that right. Whatever it is, you don't need the bleeding edge one, because for something like a Samsung 990 Pro, I think that is PCI 4. That's going to go about as fast as you can go, right? But you can build something like that for £1,200, and you can put it in a rack, and you can host it in a rack for £60 a month per U. So that, to me, makes so much more sense to SMEs rather than it seems to be a good solution. So you're not kind of going, we're going to put it on Azure AWS, which is very expensive, and if we're using the platform stuff, we've got to have all this DevOps capability that we may not have. Or okay, we're gonna host it in the UK, but we're not gonna pay for kind of like a managed hosting solution. We're gonna pay for shit. So we're gonna deal with the fact that if this thing catches fire, it's going to burn to a crisp, and God knows what we do. Or we're going to say, all right, we're going to pay for a managed solution, then we might as well put it on Azure, but then if we're doing so that kind of gets knotty. And it's like, actually, we could lodge it with a better provider on the continent, but then if we do that, we've got to deal with the GDPR compliance stuff, which we don't want to do. It's kind of like, well, actually, go with a decent colo provider and use prosumer hardware on the assumption that the hardware doesn't fail. There's some fine points about that. Assume it doesn't fail. But generally speaking, in my experience, this makes much more sense than what people do by default. So anyway, thanks very much for joining me this morning or this afternoon in the shed. I'm going to go and